Bienvenue, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome and thank you for joining our conversation with Leor Rotchild about offbeat strategies for lasting impact. My name is Kate McKenzie and I am your moderator for this afternoon. I am happy to be here in France. My home is in Calgary, Canada, on the home of the Indigenous people, the Blackfoot Nation. And it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for making time to be here. I am the principal consultant at Ayla Consulting, where I work with small and medium-sized enterprises to help them with their growth goals. And I'm also the co-director of the Secret Marathon film, which I'm excited to share with you is having its France premiere tomorrow. So I hope you will join us at 3:45 for the film about the first women to run a marathon in Afghanistan. I am also the director of the Secret 3K walk-run series that's related to that film that takes place in 27 countries around the world, encouraging gender equity. And I am delighted to be joined today by Leor Rotchild. Joining us from Canada for his 5th World Forum, Leor Rotchild is a best-selling author and sustainability consultant with over 20 years of experience in energy, sustainable events, and business transformation. Formerly with Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, he is now a sustainability consultant helping organizations reduce their carbon footprint while driving meaningful change. Leor's innovative strategies and compelling stories make him a pioneer in integrating sustainability and purpose into action. Please help me in welcoming Leor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It is such an honor and a privilege to be back in Lille for the World Forum. I love this event, and it's so nice to see some familiar faces and so many new friends, too.
So today, we will be using Slido for questions. So please take a moment. You'll see up on the screen that you can scan the QR code so you can participate in our conversation, or go to slido.com, number 1243995, or 1243995 at slido.com. And you can add your questions there. We may not get to every question, so if you see a question you like, please upvote it, and we will answer the questions in that way. Before I dive into the big questions, I would like to take a moment for our audience to get to know you, Leor. Okay. So I have a couple of questions. Our theme, as you know, for this conference is contretemps, or offbeat. So if you could have dinner with one historical figure known for being unconventional, who would it be?
Well, let me give an unconventional response and say, so I'm a big fan of Prince, the artist, the performer who recently passed away. I think it would be fascinating to sit down with Prince and talk about creativity and unlocking all kinds of unconventional things that really penetrate the mainstream and get creative ideas to resonate with many people who may not have even heard of Prince until he suddenly came out with this explosive movie with him on a purple motorcycle and Purple Rain, and yeah, I'm a fan, and I think it would be a fascinating conversation.
Okay, I like it. What's a unique or offbeat ritual that keeps you grounded?
You know, my immediate response, I would like to say, you know, going to the mountains or going out to nature and doing some snowboarding, but in truth, I haven't done that really since having children. And so probably the thing that keeps me grounded more these days is just getting on the ground and playing with the kids, and you know, especially building blocks, and then watching them knock it all down.
And I wonder, what is one thing you look forward to when you come to France? You've been here in Lille now. This is, I think, your 3rd time. What do you enjoy about coming here?
You know, I love French cuisine, but I also really love croissants. I just have this like craving for croissants all the time. And in Canada, I buy croissants, but it's kind of like more like a dessert. And here you can get croissants everywhere, anywhere, and they're always so good. I just love that about being in France.
You do have a love for croissants, so I can understand this. Now, we may need your help, audience. I'm going to invite you on Slido. If you have food recommendations for Leor, if we need to expand his palate, please add. I see someone has already told you that you should be trying crepes. Add crepes to your croissant love. So any other recommendations? Please add them in. And just a reminder, too, that we are open for any questions on Slido, so please add your questions there. All right. So, Leor, you are a sustainability professional. Why did you write a book about events?
So the book is called How We Gather Matters because I really do feel like so often in events like this, we think of them as purposeful if they connect people and encourage networking and perhaps some learning. But really, those are table stakes. That's the minimum that an event can do. I feel like there's this opportunity to elevate events like a medium, an important platform in our society to cut through the noise and reach dozens, hundreds, thousands of people at a time, both in terms of engaging them on sustainability issues, by showing what it looks like when you manage the footprint of the event, so sustainability in action, which can inspire people to take their own action. But also, I feel like events are like this opportunity to step into the future and say, what's new and different here? And then after having this memory creation, this sensory experience, to then take that away and say, why can't every day of my life look like that experience that I had at events? And I feel like it's a powerful platform for creating profound change in our society.
I love that. And, you know, it relates for me because I think, you know, one of the things that made me want to go into filmmaking was to paint a picture of what the future could look like, or to show people a possible example of what our communities could look like. I think sometimes it's hard to imagine something until we see it, or it's hard to imagine ourselves in a space until we can see it. So I love that you're applying this to events and thinking about how it looks to imagine a different future when we attend an event. Now, building on that, though, often if we're presenting these new ideas, I know from my own work with organizations that bringing in new or offbeat strategies can be challenging. And sometimes, you know, especially in a change-resistant environment, people don't always want to change. So with your experience in corporate sustainability, what approaches have you found that are most effective in helping companies embrace these counter-tempo ideas or contretemps, especially ones that don't fit a traditional corporate rhythm?
Such a good question. So throughout my career, I've had this opportunity to work in a number of different industries, and I ran my own B Corp events business and my own consulting business. I also worked in the oil and gas sector. And some people think that that's controversial. Really, I didn't expect somebody who's so passionate about the environment to work in the oil and gas sector. First of all, I met some of the most brilliant environmentalists that I've ever known in the oil and gas sector, but I also found it to be such an important place to affect change, transformational change, and moving companies towards energy transition. And I definitely met a lot of people who didn't believe climate change was really happening. And for me, I always felt like these are the most important conversations I could be having right now, to instead of, you know, approaching these conversations by saying, well, if you don't identify with the worldview that I come to the table with, then we can't have this conversation. I think it's important to put that away especially in a world that is moving towards the kind of politics that we see happening in the US right now. I think it's important to understand how we can find common ground to talk to people on the issues that are important to us to move forward together. And I'll just maybe give one example that I wrote about in my book. I had this experience, and I'm looking at this glass of water, so it's making me remember about my writing about how in the events world, I worked with the Calgary Folk Music Festival. So it was a large 30,000 person music festival in our home city of Calgary. And I thought that I had a pretty clear understanding of where the resistance might be if I moved the festival towards phasing out disposable water bottles. I was like, okay, this is going to be an economic challenge, so I'm going to figure out how to make up the financial difference that the festival might incur because they are no longer selling bottled water. And I had a whole plan, and I presented this plan. And the resistance did not come from where I expected it to. It came from the stages crew, the people who manage the stages. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming. And they were like, you're gonna bring in reusable water bottles, but like they're gonna spill all over the stage. It's gonna short circuit the equipment. We're not gonna have any music at a music festival. And I was like, whoa, where is this all coming from? And just sitting down with people after that kind of like emotional meeting, and actually trying to understand, where are you coming from here? What did people do before you used plastic water bottles? Well, I don't remember, but really trying to uncover, okay, but why do you feel that way? I realized after the conversation that what they were most concerned about was damaging the relationship that they had with these performers. One of the reasons that they loved their job so much was because they get to meet famous musical artists, and they didn't want to tell them, no, you can't have a bottle of water. So, okay, we can plan around that. We can make sure that you're never put in that position, that there's always an opportunity to make sure that people have what they need, and really cater to the performers. Well, we had one performer who was so happy about his reusable bottle. He stood up on the stage and said, I love this festival. I'm so happy they think about these things. I'm going to take my branded Calgary Folk Fest water bottle around the world with me on tour. And they're like, okay, clearly this is a successful program. And I feel like because we co-created the backup plan and really listened to their concerns, we were able to move forward, as opposed to just like saying, well, there's resistance here. I can't move forward at all.
I love that, because you're really trying to listen to where are people coming from, what's the worldview that they have that might be causing some resistance to that change, right? And I think it's so important to be reflecting on the worldview. For myself, I think about that with our film that we did about the first women to run a marathon in Afghanistan. As you can probably imagine, I am not Afghan, and so it was really important that we would co-create with the community, right? And so if we want to talk about how do we use sport as a way to move forward gender equity, then the film can't be about Afghans. It needs to be made with Afghans. And it's a small distinction, but it's so important if you actually want to create the change. We can't be doing it about, we need to be doing it with. And I think this worldview piece is also going to be important in your culinary experience of Lille. I'm getting more feedback here. Apparently, you're supposed to try something called a Welsh. Can you put up your hand if this is a good idea? Yeah, do we recommend this to Leo? Okay, we see some recommendations here. There's a couple more, but I'll save them for later for you to know. Yes. And thank you for those of you that are sending in some questions. We'll go to those in a moment here. So I mentioned earlier that we developed an event called the Secret 3K, which is a run walk that we do every year related to the film on International Women's Day. And I've seen firsthand, Leor, what you've talked about, this power of events to inspire global conversations. And specifically for me, it's been a conversation around gender equality. You've talked extensively about how gatherings can be catalysts for societal change in your book, How We Gather Matters. What do you think is the key to designing events that leave a lasting impact? And how do we sustain that impact after the event ends?
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that question. Here's one really sort of tough reality that I've arrived at, which is that when I first started writing my book, I ran this sustainable events company, and I was really moving more towards my consulting business. And so I thought, for the clients that I had and for other people who are calling me, wanting me to come in and do work on their events, I wanted to have like a do-it-yourself guide, like a kind of a practical how-to on how to manage the environmental footprint of these major events. But what I realized is that a lot of people don't really care or don't really resonate with numbers, like the idea that we've reduced, X amount of greenhouse gas emissions, or we diverted X tons of waste from the landfill. I think that most people just don't think in numbers, and they don't remember numbers, but they do remember stories. And they do remember stories about how these kind of environmental initiatives are improving people's lives. And so when I think about that idea that you just asked me about regarding building a lasting legacy, like that's the most beautiful thing about an event. Obviously, you can create a wonderful dynamic. You can engage people on the environmental impacts, but long after the event is over, what will be most meaningful is like the jobs that you created locally, the opportunity to involve the local community in some of what has happened at the event and have them benefit from that. And one story that is one of my favorite stories that I've shared is my work with the Calgary Stampede. So the Calgary Stampede is this like mammoth event. It's something that's hosted in my home city of Calgary. It kind of takes over the city.
It's about like 1 million people attend daily.
But it also is beyond just what happens at the Stampede Park. At every corner of the city, there's free Stampede pancake breakfasts and country and western concerts, and there's a rodeo. The biggest prize is $1 million. It's an amusement park. It's an arts and culinary festival. There's a lot going on. And everybody in the city, whether you're participating or not, dresses like a cowboy, cowgirl, cow person. And I ran their environmental programs for many years. When the pandemic shut the Stampede down for the first time in 115 years, obviously these programs kind of disappeared for a couple of years. And when they were resurrected, what we did was we transitioned the program so that this organization called the Center for Newcomers took over the program to make sure it continued into the future. And they were working with refugees from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, and from Syria. And so these really meaningful environmental jobs were given to these individuals from these countries who really needed the work. They're good paying jobs. They're helping them to resettle into the community. Many of them were sending money back home to family members in these, that they left in difficult situation back home. And the Calgary Stampede wound up hiring many of these people as permanent staff members. And so that lasting impact helped to give people their first Canadian work experience, helped them resettle in the community, and they're so loyal to the Calgary Stampede for the rest of their lives going forward, I think.
And what strikes me that's interesting about that, Leor, is that, when you first started working with the Calgary Stampede and you first started your work doing environmental programs, I'm sure you didn't imagine that the big impact was going to be newcomers to Canada, then
Right,
taking
yeah.
that over and having job placements for them. And,
Right.
you know, I've been really inspiring hearing some of the work of some of the international speakers here today, Leonardo and Pedro, and both of them have really encouraged me to be thinking, you know, sometimes I think we have to let go of trying to think we know what the end outcome is going to be, because we're working together towards something, but we may not know the end result. I've seen the same thing, you know, with the Secret Marathon film. When we started the film, we had no idea that it would also create this event with the Secret 3K. We had no idea that that event would grow in momentum and go to 27 different countries. And, you know, I'm happy to share with all of you here, this is not yet gone public, so you are some of the first to know, that this event that started in Canada and started with people like myself trying to create safe and inclusive spaces for everyone to go for a run or walk, now this event is going to be taken over by young Afghan women who are now living in Canada that came over from Kabul when the Taliban retook over the country. So I could not have imagined that outcome, and yet that's going to be one of the biggest lasting impacts from what started as a film. We have a couple questions from the audience, so I want to go to one. They said, Leor, with your work on climate and sustainability, what do you see as the biggest obstacle cities face when shifting to more responsible practices, and how can they overcome it?
Such a good question. There's a lot of obstacles, but one of them, from my experience, and is that I think that there are some cities in the world that, for one reason or another, they have a culture of like citizens really being engaged on this issue, and there being a lot of grassroots citizenry action in this regard. There are other cities in the world where there's a lot of work that's needed, and different civil society groups and even the government is trying to inspire more action. And there are people who are saying, you know what, we don't want our tax dollars going towards that. We don't feel like it's the government's role to affect change here. And there's this resistance. And I think that what's really important, and we've talked about it a little bit, but perhaps haven't named it, is really understanding who those stakeholders are, especially the very influential ones, and making sure that they feel heard and that their voices are at the table. And I think that, just getting back to what I was saying before about like, if there are people who have identified themselves by saying, I don't believe climate change is real, instead of saying, well, we can't work together, to say, okay, but I'm sure there is something that you feel is important. Perhaps it's air quality, perhaps it's something else that's related, perhaps it's health in general. And finding a starting point, I think, is really important. We have to
Finding those shared values.
Well, yeah, and I heard Pedro say this too, the idea that you shouldn't create these kind of mechanisms specifically to agree. You should create them to have diverse voices help you build something that is going to be accepted as this is the smart thing to do. And we have heard from a multitude of voices, and it's not necessarily the consensus, but we have a way forward, and we are going to move in this direction. And we have invited people to the table, whether they chose to accept that invitation or not. We have created that opportunity for people to participate in something that is going to shape the future of their city. So I think that's really important.
I would echo that, and I think there's also this important question that I think we have to ask is, who's not at the table? right? Because we are engaging various different stakeholders, but I think we also have to look around. In Canada, we're having this conversation a lot around our Indigenous people, is have we invited our Indigenous people to the table to be part of this conversation? But I also see in the work that I've done around gender equity is, do we have a representation of people who identify, across the gender spectrum? And if not, then are we truly building something that will be reflective of everyone in our society or everyone in our city? And so I think we have to ask this question as well. I want to maybe give some more examples too of what you were talking about, and this can be at a city level in terms of large-scale events, like I know you have an example in your book of COP26 in Glasgow, and maybe also some more, I can provide some grassroots examples, but we've kind of talked about how this idea of storytelling and the stories that we share and how we can frame an idea. You're also deeply involved in sustainable supply chains and carbon reduction. So how do you think these two different ideas of storytelling and sustainable supply chains intersect to help amplify the impact? Are there some lessons you can share between those two?
That, and I also am conscious of this question that I see bubbling up to the top, which is, what are the most effective ways to bridge gaps between business, governments, and NGOs to create systemic change? I think that I can
you want to tackle both?
I have something to offer that I think relates to your question.
Please.
And you asked me about COP26, because yes, I did write about COP26 in my book. That was the convention of the parties that was held in Glasgow. So we just wrapped up COP28 in Baku, Azerbaijan. The one that I wrote about in Glasgow had a number of really interesting examples, but one of them that relates to supply chains was in centralizing the transportation that was related to bringing goods and services, but bringing goods to the venues. And so instead of having all these different suppliers truck their materials in, they had one trucking company go out and pick everything up in one large container and bring that all together as a way to limit the amount of ground transportation happening. And I feel like supply chain, and the more I work on sustainability, the more I feel like supply chain is it's where the action is in terms of creating real change. And whether it's in business or whether it's government or whether it's other organizations, when you tap into these pockets of suppliers, you realize that so often these, especially small and medium-sized companies, are part of the supply chain for lots of different organizations and lots of different industries. And too often, the signals that we actually send to the market is, if you're not the lowest cost provider, you're probably not going to get our business. And so I've seen this time and time and again, where an organization will have their net zero emissions targets, they'll have a whole bunch of sustainability metrics, but it never actually gets to the procurement people who make the decisions around who they contract and who they purchase from. And so incentivizing those individuals who run those areas of an organization is really important to align with those goals, because can anybody have a guess, like, and this is a study that I commissioned in Canada, so forgive me, it may be different in Europe, but have a guess in Canada, if you were to look at all the publicly available requests for proposals out there, how many of them do you think even mention the word sustainability or environment in any way? Like, have a guess. Just shout it out. 5%?
Got 5%, I hear.
5%. Any other guesses? 10%?
I hear 10, I hear 3. Who's 3%? The winner here, Leor?
10% is pretty close. It's about 12%. But that means that the vast majority of like requests for proposals that are going out for to invite people to bid on a contract are sending the message, sustainability is not that important to us. And even the ones that do say sustainability is important to us, if you look at the scoring system for how they actually rank who is the company most likely to get the contract, it's usually the company with the best price and the strongest relationship with, like, if they already have an existing history with us as an organization, they're likely to get the business. So I really feel like supply chains is a really big part of how we make this stuff real, how we demonstrate to the market that we're in the business of buying and partnering with suppliers that can help us achieve our goals. And when we do that, we help them to create the economies of scale that they can offer to other clients and other industries. And then we're changing entire segments of society, whether it's like the construction industry is starting to change because the construction industry is spending more on sustainability outcomes, or changing many other aspects of how government works, for example.
And so, I mean, I hear you speaking about this on this large-scale level with your example from COP26, this idea that we could centralize things like trucking transport, and that works if we have a very large-scale event, right? But I think I would say on the grassroots level, right, we also may be thinking of, okay, if I have a smaller event or a smaller organization, how do I start there, right? And maybe I'm not operating at the same scale. And so I see that there's a question about how can small and medium-sized enterprises really get involved with making a lasting impact. And I would say, when we started Secret 3K, we were organizing it in 10 cities across Canada. And it was all in the same day. And so we knew that we needed to come up with some alignment between everyone in all 10 different cities, because there was no way that our organizing team could be at every single city all at the same time. We have not developed that technology yet. So what we did was we really created values and centered it around the values so that people could make decisions and make quick decisions knowing that they aligned with our values. And one of the values was around sustainability. And so that meant that, within our events, we knew that we would have an individual at the end of every event that we call a sweep that would go behind all the runners and all the walkers to make sure there was nothing left behind, that we left the spaces that we were in, the same or better than how we had found them. It meant that we ensured that there was no, single-use water bottles at the race site, that instead we used different methods for making sure everyone stayed hydrated. But that meant that event organizers could make those decisions and make them quickly on the fly. And so I think that, in the coaching that I do for small, medium-sized enterprises, I encourage that we think about what are the values that you want to center your business around, so that not just the executive leadership can make these decisions, but everyone on the front line can make these decisions quickly and know that they are acting in alignment with where the company values are at, or where your organizational values are at. I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit, Leor, and ask you a little bit more about how events can serve as a catalyst for broader economic and environmental responsibility. So if we can expand this out a little bit, can you share an example where responsible event practices have led to lasting impacts on the local economy or influenced policy?
What an interesting question.
Perhaps even thinking about what you've observed here in Lille.
Well, obviously, we're here at an event. We're here in Lille for the World Forum for Responsible Economy. And I'm so impressed. I love this event, and I'm so impressed at the diversity of people that this event brings together, and the fact that it's really tied into what Lille is trying to achieve on a local level. And I've heard so much conversation about what can Lille offer the world. And this idea of, being a sort of a post-industrial community and what that means. And I really like the idea of how the World Forum can be a catalyst for those kind of conversations and really rally people around the idea of how to make Lille a international business center of the future. So I think that events like this are an important part of exactly what you just asked. If I could offer one other example, there's a community in Canada that is a First Nations community called Member 2 First Nation, and they have centralized the idea of events as being a critical part of their economic development policy. And for them, this is an opportunity to get off of the dependency of government funding as a way to generate revenue for affordable housing and improve education and literacy rates in their community. And so they have become the world's first First Nations community to fully adopt ISO 14001. So they're appealing to an international market, especially a European audience, to say, come host your big international events, not only in Canada, but in this First Nations community, and know that the standards that you are accustomed to in Europe are the same ones that you would see, whether it's the building code, whether it's the catering services, whether it's the food and beverages that you are going to be exposed to is of an international quality to demonstrate we're serious about attracting an international business audience. And they have done. They just this year hosted the largest junior hockey tournament in the world at one of their sites, and they've reinvested into employment opportunities. They've become the second largest employer in the region. There's actually both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people moving into this community because it's such a thriving community, and they've raised their literacy rates from like 30% to like 90% plus in a very short period of time. It's been a really impressive success story that they've created.
And I love that example because it's showing, I think Chief Terry Paul was really saying, okay, I want to create a different kind of reality for our community. It kind of goes back to where you started off, right? That events can give us this picture of what a future could be like in our community, right? And so I love this idea that he was kind of painting that picture for the community and raising it to a different standard, right? I think, we've seen the same thing with the Secret 3K event, was that, as this event kept going, when I think about how does it impact policy, or how can an event impact policy, when we first started, I was working at an employer who would host an International Women's Day moment at the business, right? And so everyone would log on, you'd go on to your video conference call, right? And as International Women's Day was starting, you saw a screen. And unfortunately, my friends, it was a screen all full of men. And the men were saying, thank you, women, for working here at this organization. I thought there's something really wrong here. Because first of all, really, was there not a single woman on the executive leadership that could have been a part of this moment, right? And so one of the things, speaking to what you were saying earlier, of coming alongside, I think if we really want change to happen, we have to come alongside. We can't just, point the finger and say, oh, you're doing a bad job, right? That doesn't seem to work well with pretty much anyone. So we came alongside and said, perhaps the organization would like to participate in the Secret 3K next year. What if we had employees participate in our communities, hosting safe and inclusive spaces for everyone to go for a walk or run? What if our company could be part of hosting that? Now, that started this amazing conversation that then now I'm happy to say that this organization is still doing that. They're hosting these events. Their employees are out. Now it's part of the policy. Now it's in the calendar every year. Now this is a first step. Obviously, it's not the last step the company needs to take in terms of gender equity, but at least one day of the year, we're moving towards actively being engaged in solving some of the problems in the local community level. And I would like to think that as we start to do that, that opens up more opportunities for more women in leadership, that changes the policy overall and allows people to imagine a different reality.
Great example. I'm so glad you added that. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our audience, I have one more poll for you today, and I'm curious to hear what people's takeaways are from what you've heard today. So perhaps in 3 words or less, let us know what's resonating with you. What is your takeaway from today? You can add that into Slido, and we can also take some more questions as well. So I see that there's another question that says, can you share an example where a narrative or documentary you created led to tangible action change in the sustainability space? And I'm wondering, Leor, perhaps, I know in your book you share a story that you had with the Calgary Stampede about how you encouraged them to even think about bringing in the idea of sustainability. Perhaps that's a story, or perhaps there's another one that comes to your mind around that.
Sure, but feel free to add how change has occurred as a result of your filmmaking.
Sure.
Maybe I'll turn to you first, and happy to build on it.
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. Okay. I mean, the tangible action I think we've seen through the film and then also through the related Secret 3K event has been just an incredible opportunity to build leadership capacity across Canada, but around the world. So what we've been able to do with people hosting these events is not only have a conversation about gender equality, but also raise up a leadership team that can host those events. So we're creating opportunities for women and young girls to be able to be leaders in their community to host these events. So I am proud to share with you that our youngest race director was 14 years old. And she was able to be a race, thank you, yeah, it's very exciting. She was able to be a race director because she had an ally, and that ally was her father. Her father said, I want to come alongside you, support you to be a race director, support you to build your capacity to lead an event. And I think that's incredible. And our oldest race director was in her late 70s. And I think that also speaks to what we're able to do, because I think if we want to create change, it has to be multi-generational. We can't just frankly, this isn't going to happen if it's only women having the conversation. It's not going to happen if it's only people that are my age or only people who look like me. And so I'm also very excited that we've been able to continue to work with the Afghan community across Canada and around the world to engage them. So one of our largest groups of folks that joined us was actually in Indonesia. They said, we understand, we relate to what's going on for Afghan women, and we want to participate. And so we had, 200 people that participated in Indonesia hosting their own Secret 3K in that country. And so I think, to me, that's a huge lasting impact. But I also look at the lasting impact, going back to what you were talking about, creating those kinds of jobs, right? And so I was really proud when we had one of our key volunteers. She was running all of our social media and communications, young Afghan woman, and she said, I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to quit being a volunteer for Secret 3K. I said, okay, we're going to really miss you. You've been doing such an amazing job. Can you tell me more? I was thinking, oh no, like maybe something is happening for her and her family. She said, actually, Kate, I landed a job based on the skills that I've learned here. I am able now to be working as a full-time social media coordinator for an organization. And to me, that is lasting impact. That means we're building capacity in people. And I think if we want to see change occur, it's the capacity building. Now it's your turn.
I love that. I think that's actually a very good note to end on, but I will maybe just say that I've tried to share a number of stories that I've learned through my career working with lots of different organizations and lots of different industries. And there are stories about achieving net zero emissions, about designing waste out of systems and moving towards a circular economy, and also deeply embedding a sense of purpose in organizations and in activities. And I've told these stories through stories about events, because it's like a very tangible, very time-intensive, very logistical opportunity to talk about a whole bunch of potential impacts through this lens of events, which we can all relate to. Everybody's been to an event everybody celebrates life's milestones, and every industry has industry events. And so I would welcome any further conversations, because I'm going to be around. I have some books here if you're interested in taking a copy home, and I would love to share more of these stories with you.
Absolutely, and I'll invite that if anyone has further questions or we didn't get to your question today, please, we'd love to answer them. And if you're curious in more stories, again, I would invite you, please, check out Leor's book, How We Gather Matters, and read more of the stories there, or come and see the Secret Marathon film tomorrow at 3:45 and be able to see what we've been talking about here in action. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leor. We appreciate you.